This is the Gotway Monster Pro. It is the largest, fastest, and longest range, as well as the most expensive electric unicycle ever sold. And with its release, rides Goway's hope of finally challenging the veteran Sherman. The breakout success story in electric unicycle that had captured everyone's imagination, including ours, since we have picked it as the wheel of the year for 2020. Furthermore, as a long-time Monster rider, more than any other wheel, the Monster Pro had been my most anticipated wheel all of last year. This week, I finally review the Gotway Monster Pro. Are you ready for the fastest electric unicycle ever built? Roll the intro.
We got some.
As always, if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe and click on that bell icon to be notified of new episodes, and stay till the end for a preview of what's coming up next. First, shout out to eWheel for providing the demo Monster Pro that I wrote as part of this review. Check out eWheel if you're thinking about buying an electric unicycle, and I'm sure Jason will hook you up. This is the Monster V3. It was released in 2019, and although it wasn't the fastest electric unicycle at the time, in an era where ride characteristic was mostly tied to wheel size, its 22-inch diameter wheel placed it in a category all of its own. This is a wheel that may feel sluggish, difficult to maneuver, slow, and underpowered to the uninitiated, but when properly mastered, such as how Hsiang rides his, could look like nothing short of a minor miracle. And even with almost 3,000 miles under my belt, I still wouldn't claim to have completely mastered the Monster. I can at least say that I understood the sense of flow that you can get from carving with it, swinging it like a pendulum, and using its own momentum to help you brake and accelerate. And yes, there is a sense of joy that you can pull from riding a Monster that is like no other wheels. But there is something that I have always been pining for. The Monster, at least to me, never felt like it had enough torque or acceleration, especially on the upper end when you start approaching speed in the 40 miles per hour range. And I always wonder what it would be like if Goway were to ever endeavor to put a much larger motor inside of my favorite electric unicycle. And that is where this comes in. The Monster Pro, the largest, most powerful, and fastest electric unicycle ever made. With the largest motor ever fitted to an electric unicycle, the biggest battery packs, and an even larger wheel than the original Monster. Now, to give my wheel review a little bit more structure, I decided to split it into 5 parts. Convenience, design, performance, rideabilities, and finally, values. Starting with convenience, and unfortunately the Monster Pro is not going to score well here. First of all, the problem with Goway's plan is that the Monster was never designed to have mass market appeal. The original Monster was big and heavy and didn't have a trolley handle, so it was a pain to wheel around. And the even larger and heavier Monster Pro made the problem worse. Now, despite its weight, you can carry it upstairs. I wouldn't say that I'm particularly strong, but I have now taken it through the subway twice. So I actually weighted the Monster Pro yesterday. Thankfully, it wasn't what we expected to be, which was 100 pounds. It was only 90. Only sounds weird. Coming down the stair was actually easier. Because of the diameter of the tire, you can basically just roll it right downstairs. I don't know whether or not you can roll it up the stair. The tire was too smooth for you to do it. I think if you have actually a knobbier tire, you may actually be able to do that. Now I'm gonna try to go up 2 flights. So let's see how this works. You have to kind of psych yourself to do it. It's like, yeah, let's go. So It is possible. Not very pleasant, but possible. It has the same trolley handle as the EX, which is to say terrible, but better than none. The size and weight of the Monster Pro does add to the challenge of maneuvering the thing, but after a few weeks, you do eventually get used to it. The cutoff switch had been relocated from underneath the handle, which was not ideal, I admit it, to this new position directly in front of the power button, which is reachable with your thumb. However, that would require that you lift this wheel one-handed. There's no way I can go up the stairs one-handed. So as a result, that rendered this button completely useless to me, and I had to end up shutting the wheel off every time when I have to carry it. The head and tail lights are both average at best, and the speaker sounds terrible, so for convenience, I'm giving it a score of 2 out of 5. This enormous body remained very, very plasticky and likely not going to be able to survive a high-speed crash. As a matter of fact, you can probably see a whole lot of scratches and some slight cracks just from the few small drops that we have done here during the demo process. Also actually seeing a little bit larger than what is absolutely necessary. If you actually open up this wheel, you'll notice that the battery compartment, which is what is underneath this cover, is only a little bit larger than that of the veteran Sherman. And that brings us to number 2, design. Much of the plastic here is just for look, and unfortunately, at least to me, it didn't really help very much. The general look of this wheel appears bulbous and blobby with very little distinguished character to it. Goway simply took the design of the M Super and blew it up, and this is what you get. There is a handy voltmeter up front and 2 charge ports, thankfully, but the Sherman still win the usability front by a mile with its multifunctional LCD screens. Also these LED accent lighting the front and the rear of the wheel, which present a range of hokey looking color switching patterns that you can cycle by turning the headlights on and off, which unfortunately also mean that by the act of you turning the lights on and off, you're also going to be cycling through the patterns. It's unfortunate since a few of the light patterns make the wheel look a little bit silly and toy-like instead of the serious road machine that it really is. It comes with a fender that don't quite fit and fall off easily, and when it does stay, functions poorly. And unfortunately, there are very little, if any, detailing or even texture changes that would have been very helpful in breaking up this giant lump of plastic that is the Monster Pro. And I much prefer the design of even the old Monsters compared to the updated version. So for design, I'm giving it 1 out of 5. But honestly, neither looks or conveniences are why people ride Gotway. It is performance we're really after. So how does this wheel stack up? First of all, the Monster Pro had the highest free spin speed of any EUCs at 65.1 miles per hour. It is ever so slightly faster than the Sherman, and based on experience and in ideal condition, that would be warm temperature and a relatively light rider, speed up to 55 miles per hour is possible on this wheel. Not only that, with its 24-inch diameter wheels and the additional lateral stability that comes from the gyroscopic effect of all that spinning mass of motor, hub, and tire, the Monster is also likely the safest electric unicycle you can ride to be pushing at that sort of speed. And if it's range you're concerned with, then the 3600 watt-hour battery packs, which is again the largest of any electric unicycle on the market, will get you further. About 100 miles if ridden sensibly, with the caveat of course being that pushing for higher speed will burn a whole lot more electrons, and so with steeper grade and higher rider weight. There is no denying it. From a performance perspective, given its outrageous specification, the Goway Monster Pro is a 5 out of 5 winner. However, things are a little bit different from a ride feel / dynamic perspective, which isn't what a wheel is theoretically capable of, but what its actual performance and feel are really like if ridden competently by someone who is familiar with the wheel. And here is where poorly optimized firmware once again rears its ugly head. But before I get into it, I have to first talk about the original Monster.
Now, the original Monster had always been somewhat of a specialty wheel that rode like nothing else. It has to rely on the same size motor as the MSX while still pushing a larger and heavier wheel assembly, which means that its acceleration curve had a narrower sweet spot, and if you don't hit it just the right way, the Monster can feel like a ponderous and sluggish wheel.
And moving up to the Monster Pro required the same acclimation process even if you were coming in from a Monster, simply because it is a whole nother magnitude when it comes to size, weight, and even the power of the wheel.
I had described riding the original Monster as a negotiation with its 22-inch tire. With the Monster Pro and its 24-inch tire, it is a full-on wrestling match. Full body lean and pads are required to pull performances out of the Monster, and with skill and practice it still can be ridden with great agility, as Law is demonstrating here.
And at speed, the gyroscopic stabilizing effect of that 24-inch wheel is significantly stronger and more noticeable even compared to the original Monster. Strong enough where if you want to carve with a wheel above 35 miles an hour, you would need to put a lot more effort and your body weight behind your movement to balance against its tremendous weight and power. Heck of a workout if you actually want to ride the Monster Pro to the edge of its performance envelope, which may be a positive or negative thing, depends on your personal preferences.
What's more, the firmware currently does not allow easy access to the full potential of its 3500 watt motor. By pulling on the handle, we were able to get a glimpse into what the Monster Pro is actually capable of, and it's both shocking and disappointing to see how much of its potential is currently locked away behind unoptimized firmware.
And it's because of that disappointment that I'm only going to award it 3.5 out of 5 when it comes to ride feel, since although I still think that the Monster Pro is a tremendously fun and exciting wheel to ride, because of its poor optimization, it just requires that much more skill and practice in order to truly appreciate what it's actually capable of. Finally, we must talk about value, which is always challenging since it's nearly $4,000 price tag, what very likely means very different things to different people. So I'm going to try to discuss it in terms of how it compares to what else is available in the electric unicycle market.
And I have to mention here about the many problems associated with bearings on the hollow core motors that seem to persist with the many wheels that have it, including the Monster Pro. I don't really know what the actual frequencies of failure rates are, but given the difficulties of replacing bearing, this is a huge potential headache.
Then there is also the almost treadless tire that, for whatever reason, Goway had decided to use instead of the tire that they had on the original Monster. It works well enough on drive and perfect pavements. However, based on my own experience, it worked pretty poorly because of how smooth it is in any adverse condition or off-road, which means that if I were to buy this wheel, there's a good chance that I would want to swap out the tire, and that would just add even further to the already very high cost of this wheel.
There is also the poor QC and uncertainties that seem to accompany all Gotway launches, especially when there is a new shell and design. I wouldn't be surprised if more problems began to surface as more people get their hand on this wheel.
With all that said, I have to give the Monster Pro a score of 2 out of 5 when it comes to value. Despite its vast potential, this wheel seems to suffer from a distinct lack of testing and refinement. A disappointment, especially considering, once again, its very high price.
You had to be a pretty hardcore Monster lover to be willing to sign up, despite the many known and unknown problems you may have to deal with. And I'm going to add that shortly after the making of this wheel, the control board burned after a pretty routine jump from David, whom shall be known henceforth as the destroyer of demo wheel. And I have heard of another burn Monster Pro from a rider in Poland, alarming considering how few of these wheels are actually available currently. So I would say that as it is, and until the problem have been identified and fixed, you should not buy the Monster Pro. But problems doing intros are not at all uncommon for Gotway wheel launch. So should you still consider buying the Gotway Monster Pro?
And it may not sound like it, but at least for me personally, the Gotway Monster Pro is still a buy. Despite having it basically burned up right in front of my eyes, I still want to spend a whole lot of my hard-earned money on buying this wheel. I mean, I'm certainly going to give it a little bit of time and see how Gotway will actually address the many problems that's currently plaguing this wheel. But my decision for wanting to buy this wheel is pretty simple. This is the motherfucking fastest wheel on the market right now, and it rides like a cannonball out of hell. I love the feeling of wrestling and flinging this beast of a wheel around, and the sense of infinite power and speed that I have not experienced anywhere else.
And when I blast down the street with it, overtaking every single thing in the road while carving and pulling on the wheel, the ride feels spectacular and there is nothing else like it. This is not an electric unicycle for everyone, but you'll know if it is for you.
Dedicate this record to Carnival to all you brothers taking long trips down south, Virginia, Baltimore, all around the world, and your girl gets this message that you ain't coming back. She's sitting back in the room, the lights is off, she's crying, then my voice comes in, pow, in the middle of the night, and this is what I told her for you.
Oh man, look at the time. I somehow managed to waste another 15 minutes of your life, but I hope you enjoyed it. I'd love to know what you think, and please give it to me straight in the comment section below. And shout out to my supporter on Patreon. Please check out the link in the video description if you enjoy and like to support my work. And as always, as much as we all love electric unicycle, the only way for us to get better wheels is to grow as a community. So tell your friends and teach them how to ride and get them hooked.
Baltimore, November.
And until the next video, thank you.
She's sitting back, and then my voice comes in, November. You can dance. You can dance.
So the original plan was to do a speed test video with the Monster Pro to see exactly how fast I can go on it. But unfortunately, as mentioned, it sort of burned up. Not only that, disturbingly, inside of just 2 weeks, we had 2 other instances where wheels went up in flames. So next week, we're gonna talk about the death of the Monster Pro.